After a poet introduces himself or herself with the intimate news from the soul, I think it would be ridiculous to try to introduce the person then in other terms. Let me just elect them. We met the poet, and I think most of you, practically all of you, were there last night. So she opened herself to all of us. We know her. And today we are going to listen to the professor from Chicago University, NYU, and all other places where she has been studying and being a scholar and teacher. We already heard that she is obsessed with romanticism, and, well, this is everybody's envy. So we agreed that Maureen would tell us how she feels, how she perceives the scene of American poetry today. And in the panel discussion in the afternoon, we will be joined by Justin and Kerry, hopefully, and discuss it, and you, of course, and discuss it in a panel or group discussion. Without any further sort of taking time from the keynote speaker and from you, let me introduce her, let me invite her to the platform.
Well, thanks so much for coming on an early, damp day. It's really been a delight to be here, and such a wonderful day yesterday. And so I'm honored to be here, and today my talk is called My Poets, Divagations Toward a Weather Report. Is this annoying? Everyone should have a handout, and if you don't, there's some extras here. A few words about my title, and I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, and I may cut it down too. I just published a book this past spring called My Poets, and it's a work of experimental prose in which criticism meets memoir. And in this book I mix essay, poetry, aphorism, abecedary, memoir, and meditation in about 14 chapters, ranging from an essay on one word in Chaucer, cankadort, a word which means a kind of predicament, to chapters on my Elizabeth Bishop, my Gertrude Stein, my William Carlos Williams, my H.D., my Marion Moore, my Fanny Howe, and my Louise Glick. And I see that some of, quote, my poets are also your poets from the wonderful conference papers we both heard yesterday and we'll hear later today. And many of the poets I've listed, you'll notice, are Americans, and only two are now living, Louise Glick and Fanny Howe. And so one thing I'd do here is recommend their work, especially if you don't know them, especially Louise Glick's recent book of Village Life, and her collected poems is coming out any minute. And Fanny Howe's selected poems. And on the handout, I just listed a whole number of books I might mention en route, just so you have them there for further reference. And I also have various extracts that I'll be reading from. Not all of them will I read. And may I also say that this is by no means does this talk necessarily register my absolute favorite contemporary poets. It registers certain features of the landscape. Some of the people I actually feel unambivalent about are on the board. So in this book, My Poets, I wrote not necessarily about the, quote, best poets or the most worthwhile poets, but those poets whose work most marked me. Those poets I've encountered at crucial life junctures, through whom I will always think and feel those nodes of my life. So when asked to visit the university here in Olomouc to speak today at this 18th International Colloquium on American Studies devoted to the rainbow of American poetry, I was extremely honored, but also somewhat daunted. Hadn't I exhausted myself of any thoughts on American poetry? Hadn't I more or less stopped following in any comprehensive way the contemporary U.S. poetry scene? Wasn't it best to rely on others for something to say about new work? To place it on a grid or to describe, weigh, balance, judge, recommend? These were my misgivings, and thus the invitation to speak with you today has been a great gift. For not only has it brought me to your lovely city and your university and to join this conversation, not only has it brought me for the first time to the Czech Republic, but your invitation has returned me to several books which have moved, intrigued, sometimes disturbed, and more often delighted me. And so today, my talk will follow some of those divagations and will offer one poet's thoughts on some American books, poets, and genealogies. And I call this talk a divagation toward a weather report. Divagation I take from Ezra Pound, that great impresario. And a divagation is a wandering, a message that departs from the main subject, as the dictionary has it. It is cognate with vagary. To divagate is related to diverge and to digress, and you'll hear this morning some digressions and some wanderings, but I hope too there'll be some shimmerings en route, if not a perfected rainbow of American poetry. The title of this conference prompted many thoughts. Of the Rainbow Coalition in the U.S., the civil rights organization founded and led by the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Of the Rainbow Flag, most famous as an banner for gay pride and the LGBT community. And I don't suppose this latter is necessarily what the organizers might have had in mind. But certainly the rainbow of American poetry includes queer artists, the recently deceased Adrienne Rich, the young poet Jericho Brown, the much lauded Doug Powell, Brian Teer, to name a few. And I have been curious to know, and will continue to be, whether for most of you here, rainbow connotes primarily the racial and ethnic diversity typically associated with the most inclusive version of America, a kind of Whitmanian inclusive multiculturalism. Whether multiculturalism is the best or even a useful frame for considering U.S. poetry is a discussion that has long been raging and worth continuing. The very image of a rainbow prompted another phrase in my title, weather report. So today I bring you not an account of the state of the poetic field, but a perhaps idiosyncratic registering of the poetic weather since the turn of the century. As the Canadian poet Lisa Robertson puts it in her book, The Weather, Handout 1, my purpose here is to advance into the sense of the weather. The rainbow of American poetry, for me, encompasses North America, Canadian and U.S. poetry in their Anglophone dimensions. If I were multilingual, I would point you more assuredly to some poets such as Nicole Broussard, a French-Canadian poet, or to the many poets working in Spanish, Mandarin, Hebrew, and other languages in the U.S. The heteroglot glory of American poetry has long shown itself in its plurality of registers and occasional mixing of languages and dialects. And one could argue that there is a poetry of the Americas, and that my weather report is problematically monolingual. And you would be right to say so. For a weather report is made via instruments, and I, as an instrument, am a limited, contingent historical thing, a person largely heir to and working in an Anglophone tradition, though very interested in other poetries and other traditions. William Cullen Williams famously wrote that it is, quote, difficult to get the news from poems. But many of the books I'll discuss would seem to suggest otherwise. We might consider Katie Ford's book Coliseum, addressing the impact of Hurricane Katrina on New Orleans, or the registrations of the various crises in finance, capital, and the economy in such books as Joshua Clover's Totality for Kids, Timothy Donnelly's The Cloud Corporation, or Kathleen Parr-Palm's new book, Engine Empire, the book in 3 sections moving from this phantasmatic, violent border town, frontier town, to China's Chengdu, a boom town she imagines as throttled by insane growth, to a third part in a futuristic zone called the World Cloud. Bringing the news in poetry doesn't mean something as simple or vulgar as translating the headlines into lyric. It means something else for the best poets and writers, metabolizing and in some cases transforming the given in all its complexity into verbal art. Quote, transforming the actual into the true, as Louise Glück puts it. In one of his many quotable slogans, Ezra Pound defined poetry as news that stays news. So I want to make clear that while I'll often be talking about poets' apparent subjects and content, America, globalization, mediatization, the threatened thinning out of the self, I hope more profoundly to direct our attention to these poets' ways of coming to and inhabiting and formalizing their subjects. To invoke Wallace Stevens from A Necessary Angel, quote, what is the poet's subject? It is his or her sensible world. At their best, Poets incarnate a sense of the world and potentially remake our sense of a fragile and possibly shareable world. For the world emergent in many recent books is a vulnerable one. Here's Jennifer Moxley, The Price of Silence, handout 2. The century has just begun. Is the new century a failure? A failure locked in an image to which we don't have access? Beautiful austerity, Europe after the fact. It still works nicely in poetry, like worshiping outdated gods. We wish light flooded into this century as light once used to do. Here's Joshua Clover from Crea, handout 3. At this time, there was an expectation of terror, meaning cops in Kevlar and the green civic garbage cylinders sealed with discs of steel. And from Clover's poem. So I went outside into the nervous system of the air, went out into the signal and static, river mutter, steeple bell and traffic, net of noise knotted by sirens, into the brutal red dream of the collective. Here's Timothy Donnelly, To His Debt. Number 4, the second number 4. Where would I be without you, massive shadow dressed in numbers, when without you there behind me, I wouldn't be myself. And here's Claudia Rankine from Don't Let Me Be Lonely. Walking home, I find myself singing softly to the tune of Deo, Come Mr. Taliban, give us Bin Laden. We were all on our way to our personal best. America was seemingly a meritocracy. I, and Tiger Woods. It was the 90s. Now it is the 21st century, and either you are with us or you are against us. Where is your flag? If poets are, as Edward Pound claimed, the antennae of the race, an overview suggests that poets' antennae are twitching anxiously, sadly, sometimes hysterically and comically. It's no accident that when embarking on their own world-building projects, many poets find themselves punning on and around the notion of the word cloud. The third part of Kathy Hong's Engine Empire is called, in fact, the world cloud, as she enjoins in her Year of the Amateur, number 7. Recall the frontier inside us when the business of memory booms, when broadbands uncoil and clouds swell with sticky portals, amassing to a monsoon of live streams. The world is what you make of it, proposed Wallace Stevens. Yet we are what the world makes of us. But to invoke Tonto from the TV series The Lone Ranger, what's this we, white man? What's American about American poetry? It could be argued that a distinctively American poetry criticism preceded a distinctively American poetry. In his 1844 essay, The Poet, Ralph Waldo Emerson called for a poetry adequate to the young United States. Quote, our log rolling, our stumps and their politics, our fisheries, our Negroes and Indians, our boasts and our repudiations, the wrath of rogues and the pusillanimity of honest men, the northern trade, the southern planting, the western clearing, Oregon and Texas are yet unsung. Yet America is a poem in our eyes. Its ample geography dazzles the imagination, and it will not wait long for meters. America has now had meters and other poetic measures for centuries, and for some poets, America remains a poem in their eyes. This synoptic survey, both incanted and called for by Emerson, was most famously undertaken by Whitman, and indeed Whitman's loving caress of American diversity and variety, geologic, natural, ethnic, laboring, urban, rural, suburban, stylistic, this remains a template for some contemporary poets' work. Thus Matthew Dickman, in his All-American poem, handout number 8, you are everywhere, sweet Carolinas. You're my boss, Tennessee, you honeysuckle. Give us a kiss, Hawaii. Who says we're not an empire? Fuck them, they need Jesus. They need the Holy Ghost. Right, Kansas? Kansas, my yellow brick road of intelligent design. We are not monkeys. They're all in prison, right, Texas? Texas, I was with you on the 4th of July, watching the sky undress with my friends, and we were Americans on America Day, which is every day. Coming home from work, drinking a beer and waiting for the dark, for the night, for the rocket's red glare, lying around in a blanket in the backyard, a girl from your hometown who against you, slipping her slender foot in and out of a saltwater sandal. She's wearing cherry lip balm and taking ecstasy. Later, you can taste it. Can you taste it? The Whitmanian inheritance transformed, the survey of states made erotic, a celebration chastened by a millennial consciousness, this 4th of July poem, this Independence Day poem, slyly enacting its end runs around the American empire, quoting from the national anthem, the famously unsingable Star-Spangled Banner, its lyrics composed by Francis Scott Key in 1814, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Is our flag still there? Should it be? Recall Claudia Rankine, quote, "Now it is the 21st century, and either you are with us or you are against us. Where is your flag?" Dickman proposes the category of America as a kind of performance. Quote, "We were Americans on America Day." And given that this Sunday is your national holiday, I wonder if a Czech poet would ever write, "We were Czechs on Czech Day." Among other things, Dickman's is a poem of these states, as Whitman might have put it, saluting them, interrogating them, working through the elaborate connotative fields that hover above the actual boundary lines now demarcating Texas, Carolina, Wyoming, etc. Texas, with its infamous prisons and state-sanctioned murders, its death penalty regularly enacted, its scientific laboratories filled with caged monkeys. Again, I'm ventriloquizing, this is not my verdict on Texas. There's many other wonderful things to say about Texas. But again, let's just go with what were the elusive distillations in this poem. Kansas, the home of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Kansas, infamously the heartland, the Ur home in the myth of American return, the Wizard of Oz. A myth Salman Rushdie, for example, explored and critiqued in his 1992 essay, Out of Kansas. This is a big poem, the centerpiece and title poem of Dickman's volume, and it was chosen actually by Paul Muldoon for a prize, if we want to talk about genealogies and handshakes across, the centuries. It makes big claims precisely through its mock ingenuous tone, omnivorous range, and boisterous address. Mild satire is here a route to reclamation. This is the tactic and possible weakness of much contemporary American writing, the weakness perhaps of liberalism itself. Anti-Americanism, including self-hating Americanism, is displayed and subsumed within the larger framework of America of the I Sing. Quote, "Who says we're not an empire? Fuck them, they need Jesus." The ostentatious Christian religiosity of American public life, the attraction to and repulsion from empire, Dickman catches it all on the wing, co-opting or co-opted by the range of discourses on America one encounters on any talk radio station. There are not real fangs in this poem. There are jokes and feints and buttonholings and exclamations. Oh, my sexy Transylvania. Number 9 on the handout. America, I'm in love with your imports and exports, your embargoes and summits. There's also pathos. In other poems, we encounter a dead brother, drugged friends, violent families. There is also here and elsewhere the possibility of erotic idyll, the girl with your sandaled foot, the kiss the poem promises. You can taste it. This is in the end a profoundly friendly poem. This is its strength, and for some would be its weakness. As an antidote, you might consider Frederick Seidel, one of Robert Lowell's heirs, a flagrantly not nice poet, though a lovely man, a poet renowned for his stylishly ferocious dandy persona. Revered and reviled, Seidel is one of the most polarizing poets in the U.S. today. His poem American begins thus, handout number 11. My face had been sliced off and lay there on the ground like a washcloth with my testicles and penis next to it. The car had Wyoming plates. I'd been to Colorado, but not Wyoming, which I gathered is beautiful. The other one I hadn't seen was Utah. An American rendered faceless and castrated by a car, a savage and witty critique of the American cultural imaginary. In this willfully extreme, violent scenario, Seidel runs a variation on what he elsewhere offers as an ostentatiously masculinist bravado. Seidel here offers, among many things, a satire on the road-tripping, encompassing survey that has marked many poets' work, from Whitman, but also going through Robert Pinsky's explanation of America, or Campbell McGrath's Bob Hope poem that was mentioned yesterday. Seidel, quote, I'd been to Colorado, but not Wyoming, which I gather is beautiful. The other one I hadn't been to was Utah. So if Dickman's work takes up one of the oldest tasks of poetry, to praise, Seidel's does something else, not exactly blames, but excoriates in unpredictable and sophisticated ways. And now for time, I won't read out Katie Ford's poem from her poem Division, but it also takes up the road trip in Wyoming and the strangeness of geologic time and what it is to be an individual in this strange landscape. For another example of an ambivalent, if not fully dystopic, American survey, one might consider August Kleinsoller's poem Sleeping It Off in Rapid City, in which the poet finds himself hungover. This might be relevant for someone else today. In which the poet, not me, in which the poet finds himself hungover and awake in a cheesy hotel in Rapid City, South Dakota, located in ancient Sioux, ancient Native American territory. Quote, number 13 on the handout. On a 700-foot thick shelf of Cretaceous pink sandstone, Nel Mezzo, 6th floor, turn right in the elevator, the hotel of the century, elegant dining, dancing, solarium. Around the block from the Black Hills School of Beauty and campaign headquarters of One Jack Billion, together we can move forward. The exact center of the Oglala known universe, Kantewamakobuake. The luxury hotel atop old Native American sacred ground, this ground itself the product of millions of years of geologic formation. Kleinsoller shifts in vertiginous dancerly steps across millennia to his exact yet complex location. We are in a place now saturated by commodity culture. The sacred Black Hills become a trade name for a beauty school. Yet commodification reveals the deep, if obscured marks of a violent historical past. One does not need to know the full and horrible story of the Plains Indians' encounters with the U.S. government and American adventurers. One does not need to know about the massacre at Wounded Knee, the Greasy Grass Massacre, the desecration of the Black Hills, to feel the force of Kleinsoller's lines. This is and has been contested ground. This is a poem including history, to invoke Ezra Pound, many kinds of histories. The poet invokes Dante, his Nel Mezzo from Nel Mezzo del Cammin de Nostra Vita, mi ritrovai per una selva oscura. In the middle of my life's journey, I found myself in a dark wood. The middles tracked here are many, geographic, geologic, autobiographical, economic. The poet's measures raise the question of how to measure. The poet stations us in the middle of a life, of a place, of a country. The middles are muddles, hard to measure, yet, quote, this is sacred ground, a holy place, 4 a.m. in a sacred place. I can tell this is a sacred place. I needn't be told it's in the air. I feel it. Tallying the cultural crapola in and around this hotel, ventriloquizing the prevailing ad lingo, noting the empty miso silos, eyeing the, quote, billboards with fetuses out there in the highway, invoking the U.S. government's savage wars on the Plains Indians, satirizing the merchandising of the sacred, the commodifying of history into films like Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves. Even as Kleinsoller empties out the possibility of sacredness, he preserves precisely through intermittently ironic incantation the possibility that this indeed is a sacred place, re-sacralized by the witnessing poem. This is an act of complex poetic repossession. This place, quote, the exact center of the Oglala known universe, Oglala being one of the several Sioux tribes. This place is also, quote, the heart of America. Its geography, its history, its fractured possibility. And who is to say, Kleinsoller implicitly asks, whether sacred might not yet be found, number 14. On a great slab of Mesozoic rock, this sanctified ground, here, yes, here, the dead solid center of the universe, at the heart of America. But still, what's American about American poetry? Another answer might be found in the work of Joshua Clover, his poem, What's American About American Poetry, and it's like the penultimate object. I put the whole poem on there, it's a diptych, so you can see it, from his second book of poems, The Totality for Kids. They basically grow it out of sand. This is a big help because otherwise it was getting pretty enigmatic. This is American poetry. Welcome to the desert of the real. I am an ephemeral and not too discontented citizen. I do not think the revolution is finished. So during these years, I lived in a country where I was little known. A parody and a parrying, this poem is exemplary of a certain experimental strand of American poetry for many reasons. Its tone, its stance, its play. This diptych is a formal as well as thematic intervention. He gives us two versions, as you see, none the original, both suspended, rotating in slightly different yet related cultural space. Putting the poem in French first, Clover forestalls us from reading the English poem as the first, the French as the second, a translation and aftermath. Insisting not so much on translation as transliteration and translationality, and on the gap between versions, Clover asks us to feel the difference in and of difference. Clover is a flagrant self-styler, lodging himself in several genealogies, not least that of the French avant-garde, which from a Francophilic perspective equals the world historical avant-garde. In both form and content, Clover ceaselessly tests the possibility of experiment, innovation, revolution. A latter-day flaneur, je me promène, principalement je me promène, Clover doubly dramatizes the situation of American poetry. The poem in French resonates along different axes. Its question, a question a presumably French-speaking questioner might pose. The title of the poem in English could be read as a ventriloquization of a possibly idiot savant question, perhaps from the Anglophone world. A question which spawns the mock material explanation of the first line. They basically grow it, American poetry, out of sand. The sands of American deserts, of Iraqi deserts, the sands of time. How about the sands of the desert of the real, which is where we all supposedly live, as a Slovenian philosopher, Slavoj Žižek, famously proposed in his 2002 book, Welcome to the Desert of the Real. The book's title itself a quote from the 1999 movie The Matrix, which is itself indebted to the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard's notion of the simulacrum. This chain of illusion brings us right back into all kinds of things, from pop culture to a certain French philosophical tradition that matters to Clover. How to write a real poetry in a world of pernicious virtualization. How to avoid what Clover elsewhere calls, quote, the false escape of recollection. Clover is part of a strong strain in contemporary American poetry, which posits lyric or poetry more broadly as critique. Indeed, there is a strong sense with these poets that unless lyric moves through the ascesis and the discipline of critique, its bad faith will metastasize. No more poems about childhood or about trauma or memory, getting better, feeling good, having reparative epiphanies. No more emotional anecdotes, as the Canadian conceptual poet Christian Bach cuttingly puts it. So this wing of American poetry basically thinks most poetry is ideologically bankrupt and crappy, and that people are just doing the same old stuff again and again and again, and just yammering on in the same key about basically, fine, boring, liberal things. So this is so I just thought, let's register this too, in the mix. This will not be on Garrison Keillor's NPR Poetry Minute. Okay, so most Americans, most Americans don't read poetry, newsflash. Two, the poets most Americans know would not be any of these poets. That's another conversation. Clover's is one of many important recent attempts to reckon with the complex condition of sentience and utterance. And Juliana Spahr's work, this connection of everyone with lungs, is another. And her very title conjures a biological and an ecological horizon, the great weave of those who live and breathe. Yet this inquiry insists as well on the systemic interface of history and the social, as well as the biological. And her work, it's an explicitly post-9/11, post-millennial work, like Clover's, Rankine's, Spahr's, Donnelly's, Lederer's. I was really just floored when I started looking through books and how many of these recent books explicitly station themselves as kind of post-9/11 new century kinds of books. And this book, this connection of everyone with lungs, consists of two long poems. One poem written after September 11th, 2001, and an extended diaristic sequence of 15 dated movements. Poem written from November 30th, 2002 to March 27th, 2003. And in this book, Spahr is preoccupied with the run-up to the war in Iraq. So she makes a basic lyric wager on the porousness of self and environment, and thus her title, that we share a communal air, that we are one of many breathing species. These are premises that ramify throughout her book. She opens with an incantation moving from the cellular, cells and divisions of cells, to the cosmic, quote, the space of the oceans and the space of the troposphere and the space of the stratosphere and the space of the mesosphere, in and out. So Spar works with the oldest poetic tropes: inspiration, expiration, respiration, itemizing in vertiginously expanding strophes the movement of, quote, everything turning and small, being breathed in and out by everyone with lungs during all moments. This profound connectivity suggests a biological erotics, but also an extended vulnerability. Increasing connectivity means increasing the available surface for injury. Planes become bombs, radio incites genocide, Google gives up Chinese dissidents. With, quote, the space of everyone that has just been inside of everyone, mixing inside of everyone, it is no surprise that on September 11th and after, New Yorkers were admixed with, quote, suspended dust spores and bacteria mixing inside everyone with sulfur and sulfuric acid and titanium and minute silicon particles from polarized glass and concrete. The towers have fallen, the citizens breathing in and out the atoms of the dead and the destroyed structures. So in this book, it's as if, you might say, Whitman were crossed with Sappho. His radical encompassing conjoined to Sappho's fierce, delicate erotics. Yet Spar reminds us that Sappho's erotics were always engaged with the military and political values of her epic and of epic itself. Consider her famous, this is Sappho's famous Fragment 16, translated in the Loeb edition for English speakers thus. Some say a host of cavalry, others of infantry, others of ships, is the most beautiful thing on the black earth, but I say it is whatsoever a person loves. So Spar knows the Sapphic fragment, and she brilliantly mobilizes this poem, adapting it to her own critical contemporary ends in handout number 17. Some say thronging cavalry, some say foot soldiers, others call it fleet. Some say 120 Challenger, 20 Challenger 2 tanks, or infantry, or a fleet of ships. But I say it's whatever you love best. I say it is the persons you love. From handout number 16, poem November 30th, 2002. Beloveds, we wake up in the morning to darkness and watch it turn into lightness with hope. Each morning, we wait in our bed listening for the parrots and their chattering. And she goes on, and the end of that passage. I speak of global jihad, radical clerics, giant planets, Jupiter, stars gassed in dust, gravitational accretion, fluid dynamics, protoplanetary evolution, the unstoppable global spread of AIDS. As prosaic as this might sound, as different from standard free verse lyric as this looks, Spar writes a deeply traditional poetry. This movement could be read not least as a transformed aubade, a dawn song. Beloveds, we wake up in the morning to darkness and watch it turn into lightness with hope. So her governing tropes here and elsewhere in the book are anaphora and accumulation. Her Steinian parataxes induce a kind of liturgical hypnotic trance. Her commitment to itemization, to collecting and then dispersing the world, a remarkable project. But there's a risk in such a work, a risk of banal repetition, as if listing were itself transformative. This is the risk Whitman himself took with his famous catalogs, and one way to read Spar is to think of her work as a remarkable critique of, as well as extension of, a Whitmanian project. As Whitman famously wrote, I celebrate myself and sing myself for what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Spar, this connection of everyone with lungs, of everything made up of atoms, belongs to me as well as to you. So, in this attempt to redeem a relentlessly banalized, industrialized language, the poem invokes jihads, the pop star Billy Joel, AH-64 Apache attack helicopters. These poems encompass the floating detritus of late capital, but also offer an alternative, a quote, circular lisp, as she calls it, as if including all, saying all, intoning all, could transmute all.
Yes.
I'll just assume. Thank you. This is the revenge of technology on me, right? So her ready incorporation of radio and TV reports and Google searches and satellite images points to the powerful determining horizon of the media ecosphere, to the transformation of our cultural horizon that poets can't but register. For all their apparent obsolescence, poets understand as well as any video artist or video game designer that the media is the very stuff of inner life. Poets chart what Robert Frost called inner and outer weather. And part of that weather, our prevailing atmospheric condition, is the World Wide Web and our more general saturation of public and private space by its prostheses and protocols. Our medial condition transforms the very horizon of historical understanding. And this shows up implicit in a lot of poems you might consider, again, Matthew Dickman's All-American Poems, the handout 18 passage. I go inside, I turn the television on, it's playing the Civil War again. The Battle of Gettysburg remembering itself on the football field at Lincoln Memorial High. And then he goes through this whole rendering of what's going on the History Channel, the documentary on the Civil War, and he mutates out into other speculations about the American Civil War. So when Dickman writes, I go inside, he's not conjuring the world of deep interiority explored by, say, Rilke or Trockle or even Wordsworth. He conjures instead a domestic interior anchored by the TV as hearth, which is itself now obsolete for most people. I mean, anybody under 40, nobody watches TV. Right? They have a computer screen, they stream something. The other thing that's interesting about this is how immediately historical the contents of these poems look. The planned obsolescence of capitalism does very strange things to the contents of these poems. Dickman allegorically registers the inside of the self furnished by flickering images and the historical logic of our media situation. He gives us history brought to us by the History Channel. Is there a History Channel here? Yeah, so. And what is on the screen is in the mind. And the History Channel in Dickman brings us not only a riven U.S., but also a mediated Europe. Later in the poem we encounter, quote, the old reels of Germany, having the fascism bombed out of it. As already suggested, Dickman's canvas is broad, his weave is somewhat loose, held together by a buoyant persona, but his sharp focus on the mediated subject, the subject of media, is shared by poets writing in very different idioms. And I want to give you a few things for people working in a much more minimalist, focused register. Consider Graham Faust in his poem, In the Space Provided, handout 19. On a near suicidally clear day of wind, a day like television, I wake to find that a season has been designated, planets automatic, that tree's a gust of blood. One registers the minimalist menace here, the stuttering into the televisual simile, a day like television, is a day of blasted season, sudden violence, that tree a gust of blood, not wind. This is a kind of willed poetic arte povera, a making of a severe and probing poetry out of minimal means, a coruscation of lyric, but also a preservation of it. And one of the more stringent and successful pioneers of this terrain and mode is Rae Armantrout, who won the Pulitzer Prize in 2009 for American poetry for her 10th book, Versed. And she's written for decades a very contemporary, deeply weird poetry, encompassing celebrity culture, TV chatter, game shows, ambient sound, highway meridians. These are her nature and ours, implicitly. Her poems are exacting, oppositional, and restless, and they might be seen as latter-day extensions of romantic inquiry and critique. What is a person, a self, an I in this historical moment? What is the relation of person to environment? Armantrout explores what we share and what we cannot. She asks how we become versed in so-called knowledge, and like Joshua Clover, but with very different metrical means and lexical resources, she explores the waning of affect, quote, in postmodern society. Both of these poets welcome us to the desert of the real. If you see on handout 20, Armantrout. The new pop song is about getting real. You had a bad day. The camera don't lie. But they're lying to you about the camera. Poets like Dickman and Spar and Faust and Armantrout register and test the specifically mediated mind, the historically specifically mediated lyric. That camera might lie, that pop song might be your mind. But after all this, whither pleasure? William Carlos Williams famously wrote, if it ain't a pleasure, it ain't a poem. The dystopic, catastrophic horizon of much American poetry cannot quash its insurgent pleasures. Consider Rowan Ricardo Phillips, a young black poet and translator who just published his first book, The Ground, which features this ars poetica in his poem Terra Incognita, number 21 on the handout. I plugged my poem into a manhole cover that flamed into the first guitar, jarred the asphalt and tar to ash, and made from where there once was ground a sound to stand on. Grounding oneself in sound, a neo-Heideggerian move, an old troubadour's move, a brilliant rapper's move, language itself become our ground, this poet's ground, his first book called The Ground. Phillips has the capacity to sound out new ground, to offer new measures for new days, and his insistence on joyous beginnings recalls Wallace Stevens, quote, after the final no, there comes a yes, and on that yes, the future world depends. And for other complex pleasures and groundings, we might consider, again, Cathy Park Hong. Her 2006 book, Dance Dance Revolution, takes its title from a video game. She writes a kind of speculative experimental poetry, and she writes not so much poems as books. Her work might be seen as having more in common with speculative fiction or alternative histories and filmmakers like the Chinese filmmaker Jia Zhangke than with most mainstream American U.S. poetry. In her book Dance Dance Revolution, it's this incredible sort of futuristic, it's actually a meditation on Korean history, particularly the 50s through the 80s. But the invented language, the globalized English in the book, picks up bits from African-American slang, Korean lexis and grammar, Spanish conjunctions, Latin tags, signs of mass and unpredictable migrations across time as well as space. And beyond all the ambitious political, economic, and intellectual zones of her work sings and zings as poetry. She's remarkably linguistically inventive, and she reads everything from Shakespeare to video games to street argot. So for a couple of examples, handout 22, parachute in cloudless cielo, school o jellyfish, emigres land in dusty terrene, and ladled a job, tram blower, jackfruit seller. Note the encompassing swiftness here. We move through a lyrical polyglot sky, skittering into low-level immigrant labor. And she's a kind of, I think of her as a neo-Elizabethan poet, profligate in her linguistic inventiveness and her wit. And one might consider the beautiful ludic tenderness in her super miscegenating toast. She has a toast in Dance Dance Revolution in handout 23. Lo, brandied man in rabbinical cape, dab rusking rosy musk on boy's gossamy nape. Brassy Brahmin papoosed in saris, saffron sheet, swoon by fair waspian in a wingtip feet, let's toast a bountiful gene pool to intramarried couple breedom beige population. Okay. Now here's somebody thinking about phonemes and morphemes and ideologenes, about ads and cliches and commonplaces, about global flows and global English. And she's continued this kind of work in Engine Empire. So again, to intermarry couple breedom beige population. So she'd be very interesting people to think about the contemporary rainbow of many things. So the other, and you have on your handout too, August Kleinsal's Pulp and Gumbo Sonnet, which I won't read or discuss, but just as another foray into linguistic pleasures and wit and seizing elements of the great mix-up that is American culture. And so you might say that not for him, not a rainbow, but a gumbo of American poetry. So as I reach the end of these divagations, I want to invoke Adrienne Rich, the poet who died this past March. In 2006, she gave an acceptance speech when she was awarded the Medal for a Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. And she offered characteristically moving and astute words, and I'm not going to quote all this, but a little bit on handout 25. She says, I'm both a poet and one of the everybodies of my country. I live with manipulated fear, ignorance, cultural confusion, and social antagonism, huddling together on the fault line of an empire. I hope never to idealize poetry. It has suffered enough from that. Poetry is not a healing lotion, an emotional massage, a kind of linguistic aromatherapy. Neither is it a blueprint, nor an instruction manual, nor a billboard. There is no universal poetry anyway, only poetries and poetics, and the streaming, intertwining histories to which they belong. And she evokes Whitman, and then she goes on to say, poetry has the capacity of something, to remind us of something we are forbidden to see. With Rich's words in our minds, I'd like us to listen to the swinging cadences of the poet Eleni Sikelianos, handout 26. So let's link the cities of America and the cities of the Czech Republic, and let us consider for challenge and for appeal, poetic and ethical. The city is out there, and you are a citizen. What's your report? Herein ends my weather report.
Well, thank you very much for the graceful, eloquent performance.